thank you for meeting with me today and being willing to talk about this. Will you introduce yourself to everybody that might be watching this?
Sure. I'm Lydia Hoyle, and I am a professor at Campbell University Divinity School and was a professor of Marcus when he was there. And I love history and teach history and also spiritual formation. So I'm really happy to talk to you today about Sabbath.
Yeah. So you don't know this, but this past week, I wrote an article for our newsletter, kind of introducing the topic of Sabbath, and said that one of the things they tell you in divinity school is that you need to like find time and guard your Sabbath. And I never really quite knew how to do that or what that meant. And it was the going on the retreat with you and Dr. Hogan that really kind of help me reframe what that might look like for myself. And so that's why I wanted to talk to you about this. No pressure or anything. Uh, but let's start out by maybe asking the very basic question of, so that we're all on the same page of like, what is Sabbath?
I think Sabbath is a part of God's rhythm for our lives. There's multiple rhythms that I think we're kind of created to live into. One of those is just the basic daily rhythm of, we stay awake 16-ish hours and we sleep 8-ish hours. And so on a daily basis, we have that rhythm of activity and rest or sleep. I think on a weekly basis, this pattern is to have 6 days of work in our vocation, in our home, but then to have some time of rest. I know when you have a 2 and 3-year-old, you almost never are completely resting, maybe. But I think both of these things are necessary and good. We know that sleep is necessary and good. And I believe Sabbath is also necessary and good, not quite in the same way, but fundamentally Sabbath is that pattern, this sort of weekly pattern God gives us that I think are essential to having a good life. Whereas, the sleep pattern comes naturally, like we all, sort of flop into bed at some point. Even the most whiny baby will ultimately sort of drop into sleep. But I think the second pattern of Sabbath is something we have to work a little more on. But we know it's important because, in the Bible, it shows up like starting the second chapter of Genesis. I mean, that to me says, okay, here's something that matters. And it says, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he'd been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. And so we have that pattern God setting. I mean, it's a good question to ask. Does God need to rest? I think God sets a pattern for us. And then in Exodus, then when the 10 Commandments are handed out, right up there with don't kill, steal, covet, etc., we have remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. I mean, it's pretty big to make it to the 10 Commandments. I think if it makes it to the 10 Commandments, you ought to take it to heart.
Yeah. It's interesting to look at like the different ways that people practice Sabbath. And I think looking back on like some of the Jewish rules and customs around Sabbath about like severe limitations on what exactly you could do, it's really easy to frame Sabbath in a lens of doing nothing. And so, but I'm not 100% sure that that's what's actually happening. And so I'm curious, like, what is the work that's actually being done in Sabbath? Because if it's only doing nothing and it's just like a task that we have in the end of our week, I can tell you that the task of doing nothing is going to continually fall further down and down and down the totem pole of my list of to-dos. It never has that sense of urgency.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good point. I mean, I think, first of all, if you see it as a task, that's not good. So even doing nothing, that's not, like Sabbath as task is probably not going to be something that produces a positive response in us, because we've had a week full of tasks and we need a non-task in a way. But I do think there are lots of sort of positives that we should embrace. I'm in my home office, like so many of us right now. So I have a stack of books on Sabbath this tall, but I have 3 of them still even at home. And it was really interesting. I will do show and tell here for a second. These books, so this is Dan Allender's Sabbath. This is Wayne Muller's Sabbath. And this is Norman Wurzba, who is a good close friend of mine, his book on Sabbath. And the really crazy thing is, every single one of them talk about delight, not just about rest, which is part of Sabbath, the doing nothing part, I suppose, but they talk about delight, because what God did on that 7th day in creation was he delighted in what he had created. It was a sort of day of celebration, so a day of recreation. And so I think when we think about Sabbath, it's best if we think about it as a time of sort of reset. It is a time, it isn't an empty time, a do nothing time, but it is am I on the right kind of path here time, and a time to delight in what the work you have accomplished, but also the good work of God in the world.
yeah.
That's also, I think, how worship fits in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that does a really good job of kind of butting up to the way that we see Jesus interact with the Sabbath, where the Pharisees are kind of scolding him for picking grain and doing something on the Sabbath, and Jesus kind of corrects them around thinking differently about the approach to Sabbath, that the Sabbath was made for us. As this time of celebration. Maybe that explains why I struggle with Sabbath, because I struggle with genuine to rest in celebration. I think there's a tendency to like always want to try and like do the next thing, and so my I work with an associate youth director. Her name's Dana, and she always jokes with me that I'm a grumpy old man who can't enjoy anything.
Oh, that hurts.
But so that's interesting to a way of thinking about Sabbath as like celebration. Um, but I like that. I think it's really you've had an interesting task in front of you of teaching Sabbath to a bunch of people that want to go on into professional ministry, or as we sometimes jokingly call like the professional Christians. And ironically, I feel like that is perhaps a demographic that struggles the most with finding a practice of Sabbath. And so I'm curious to hear, or curious for you to share some of how you've kind of helped people to embrace a rhythm of Sabbath, and what some of the practices are that you kind of recommend to people as they're looking to incorporate this within their regular rhythms.
I think first of all, it's great the Sabbath happens on Sunday because it's our day of worship. But the Jewish Sabbath is not on, it starts on Friday evening. So I don't think we should get caught up in the when of Sabbath. I know in graduate school, my husband and I were every Sunday evening, I mean, we were absolutely dug in trying to get ready for Monday, because otherwise we would sink and not swim. And so we always practiced Sabbath from Saturday supper or dinner till Sunday at the same time, because it was not possible for us to be practicing Sabbath. And I don't even think that Sabbath is, if you make it into a rule that is like absolutely unbendable and it must be 24 hours in length, then I think you miss it too. If you embrace it as the gift it is, if you don't have but 2 hours when you can practice Sabbath, I think that the the main thing is that you're intentional about it, so that you kind of select some practices that you can be intentional about, that don't take a lot of work preparing. Again, if it takes a lot of work, then you're getting away from the idea of Sabbath. But I do think it takes preparation. And we see that, in all the Jewish traditions. Orthodox Jews still will like do the cooking the night before, so that they can, or the period before Sabbath begins, I should say, the day before. And then they've made a space for Sabbath. I think sometimes we'll say, well, I don't have time to stop and delight in God and his creation. There's no time. But I think if we create a space, sort of make a date with God, it can happen, but it happens because we've worked in advance. We've done the work beforehand. We've cooked that meal or whatever it is. And so there's space to do it. Now, I think in there you also ask about what are some practices of Sabbath. I love some of the traditional practices. I think are pretty cool. Like in Judaism, at the beginning of Sabbath, they light 2 candles for the 2 times Sabbath is commanded in the Torah, and it's just a way of saying, okay, this is a different moment in our week. And especially in these days of COVID, when every day looks kind of like every other day, I think it's really good to have a time we set apart. And so they will light candles, and I think that's a great practice that I follow sometimes too. And it tells the whole family, hey, we've got these 2 candles lit on the table. This isn't every other day. I know within Judaism too, they take that time to have a kind of special meal, some special foods that they don't have the rest of the week, and I think that's kind of cool. You can pull it off. The thing I like probably the most from Jewish practice is they give blessings to their children, and I think giving a blessing to your children is never going to be, in some ways, kind of a natural act for a lot of Protestants. We're not used to saying, may God bless you, like we don't talk that way to each other. But if you think about really everybody, you can hardly think of a person who would say, boy, my parents just blessed me too much when I was a kid. But rather we make it to adulthood and we feel the opposite of blessed. We feel like we never could please our parents or something. And I love it that within Judaism, there is this blessing of the children. And sometimes I think they do the kind of classic prayer we say, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord, from Numbers, may the Lord make his face to shine upon you. I think that's always going to be a good thing to do. Now, those are all Jewish practices. I think, we have an opportunity for different sorts of practices. And for me, a big piece of that comes back to that delighting in creation and in the good gifts God has given us. So for me, those good gifts are family and friends and the created world. And so I try to spend some time every Sabbath, which I do get to have a Sunday Sabbath, but every Sunday I spend some time outdoors, and a lot of times outdoors with my family. And I just try to be intentional about sort of celebrating God's good gifts to me.
Yeah, I like that idea of finding a form of like some symbolic ritual or something that kind of cues us to a different rhythm, like or a different moment than we normally experience or that we normally practice. And so, um, that idea of like lighting candles as or um, you know, I've heard of people doing like special family meals, and like that's when they bring out the special china or whatnot, or something that I guess to the point of like makes it truly feel like a celebration, makes it feel special.
Mhm.
And different. That's good.
Yeah. And I think kids really love ritual too. They love they love days that are set apart. I mean, that's part of why Christmas is so great and Easter, and because they're set apart, they're different. I mean, not to mention the gifts and candy and all that stuff, but I think I think we're drawn to that. We're drawn to the ritual, and we need it because otherwise, we'll find ways to sort of resist the whole concept. I mean, there's plenty of stuff pressing in on our lives that move us away from Sabbath, that, you know, that cause us just to almost even forget, even clergy, maybe
Yeah.
especially clergy.
Um, I think back to the when to Exodus 20 when the Ten Commandments are being handed out, and kind of part B of the commandment on Sabbath is not only a command for us to practice it ourselves, but also a command in how we create space for others to practice it, um, which may be a harder move in the culture that we live in, right? Where um, especially in a affluent society, it's easier maybe for us to carve out time or space for ourselves, but um, consideration on how we kind of create space for others. And I'm wondering, why do you think there is that call for Sabbath to not only include our own personal devotion, but also um, our relationship or our coexistence with others?
Well, I don't think it applies universally to every command of God, but I think a lot of the commands of God, a lot of the things that Christ speaks of that are taught in Scripture are ways of being, of living full, abundant lives. Christ said, "I came that you might have life and you might have it abundantly." I think that we are made to have this rhythm, like not just Christian people, Jewish people, but people are made to have this rhythm of life. I mean, I think we have a richer view of it maybe because we see the centrality of God in the midst of that. But I think we're created for it. And so I think it's what God wants. I do not think God wants for any of us just constant work. And some of us, I think, struggle with that. Plenty of us do. Where if we get a lot of fulfillment out of work, if we get a lot of pats on the back for work, we make money for work, then we just want to work. And I don't think that was God's intention. We're not just made for work. Work is good, but that's not all we're made for. And I think we can get sort of off the trail of where we should be headed if we don't stop on a pretty regular basis and sort of ask God, "Hey, God, what do you need to show me here? Am I headed in the right direction?" I mean, sometimes I think it's not just the Sabbath pattern. Sometimes, I mean, I try to do a personal retreat a couple times a year. And it's for that same reason, to sort of stop and sort of take account of where I'm headed, what I'm doing, and get quiet enough that God can show me what I need to hear. I know as I was thinking about talking with you today, was thinking about how probably a little bit before you were in divinity school, my mother was sick. She had some years of some illnesses, and I was having to go back and forth to the western part of the state, down I-40, 3 hours, twice a week. So I was teaching my classes and then heading 3 hours west, and would spend a night, come back, teach my classes, go back. So anyway, it was kind of a crazy time. And I did it so many times, hundreds of times really across several years. And so I was headed west one day, and I was so exhausted, and I suddenly looked up and saw an exit, and I'd never seen that exit before. And I thought, where in the world am I? And then I realized I must have gone off on 85 instead of staying on 40, which went to my parents' house. And so I've gone down some 30 miles down Highway 85, I-85. I mean, I was really in a zone. And I just exited and just stopped and went, okay, let's regroup. You're losing it here. And I realized if I didn't stop, I would just keep on. I don't even know, where do you end up? Charlotte. I would have been in Charlotte, which is nowhere close to my parents. I think that's what Sabbath is. It's stopping. It's being intentional about where we are in our lives. It's being intentional about remembering what we're about. I'm about loving God and loving people. Where am I getting lost in this? So yeah, I don't even know what your question was now.
That's good though. I like that idea of Sabbath kind of being the exit ramp where we can like refind our bearings and make sure we're headed in the right direction, or do we need to adjust course? You mentioned that you make it a point to have a couple different. You have different patterns of rest. So not only is there this weekly Sabbath rest, but you said that you have that you go on retreats periodically throughout the year, which draws back to some of the patterns of rest that we see within Old Testament, where there's not only the Sabbath, but there's these festivals that we practice, and then there's the year of Jubilee that we practice. And when I signed up to do the Sabbath retreat, I'd wanted to do it since I got in divinity school, and I think I'd waited until like my last year, and then I took two over my last 2 semesters, because it's so easy to come up with the excuses for why we can't, like why we can't find that time, why we can't do that. And so I'm sure other people find themselves in a similar situation. And so how do you find time, or how do you have that discipline of carving out those other periods of rest outside of just Sabbath?
Partly I'm a really calendar driven person, I guess. And so I will see, like there's a group in Raleigh that does these 1-day silent retreats. They provide kind of a safe place for that to happen, and that sort of thing. And so I've signed up for those. One of our grads does has some, again, they're silent retreats. They just provide a space and a time and a gathering. It's sort of like, for me, I need that sort of structure, because then I can put that on my calendar. It's happening on a certain day, and I can plan in advance and all that. So that's part of how I make it happen, is by planning in advance. If I don't plan in advance, I will tell you right now, in the midst of it, there is no way. I don't have time. I don't I I I couldn't at the last minute say, "Oh, yeah, I think I'll just have a silent retreat tomorrow." I don't live that life, you know. I bet you don't either. And so, yeah, I think that's how I make it happen. It's not spur of the moment. It's planned. And so when one ends, then I'm sort of looking at, and sometimes, I've done a art focused retreat, which is also kind of a silent retreat. But I've done several different things that, yeah, that that someone else has provided a structure, a place for in any case. And then I can just put it on my calendar, pay $30 or something. I'm not sure what I pay for, but just a place and a time. And so that works for me. I mean, I am still resistant sometimes for those getaways. I mean, I think we resist Sabbath. We resist these sort of breaks in our action because we've got a lot to do, and how are we going to fit that in? And especially for me, thinking about all the stuff I need to do, I have to be intentional, and I think that's the key.
I find that I'm better at sticking to something if I plan it far enough out that like nothing else is on my calendar. Right? Because like 3 weeks out, like there's a lot that's filling up time. But if I'm putting something out like 2 months, 3 months ahead of time, like it's hard to come up with an excuse for why. Right?
Exactly. Of course, that gets me into trouble sometimes because, especially like writing assignments, I'll say, "Oh, sure, I can do that thing 6 months from now. That's no problem." And then about 3 weeks from that moment, I'm frantic and I'm up half the night and I am living the opposite of Sabbath, I'll tell you.
Um, I want to ask you one final question. Thank you for your time today. Um, when you've entered into a season of Sabbath or a practice of Sabbath, um, in your own like personal experience with your Sabbath, how do you know when you've done a good job of it? Like, how do you know when you've like truly, when you've a moment when you've walked away and say like that really was like a Sabbath rest. That was what I needed.
Mm. I think I feel refreshed. I think that's when I've had Sabbath. I feel refreshed. And so instead of being kind of more tired and overwhelmed and whatever, I feel like I have a sense of God's peace and refreshment. It's sort of like they say if you laugh, you will feel happier if you just laugh. And I think maybe Sabbath is kind of like laughter for my spirit. I feel at peace and like I can face the coming week, so that there's this rhythm. I'm ready to go. I sort of probably wear down across the week and then I get refreshed. So I think that's it.
Well, thank you for doing this with us today. I really appreciate it. Um,
Absolutely.
as we get ready to go into the weekend, I hope that you have a great Sabbath rest.